On the line with us is Jeanne Kohl-Welles, our very own Pacific Northwest feminist badass icon, as she is characterized over at JeanneKohl-Welles.com. This is what her peers and friends are calling her. But I think perhaps most importantly, she's a city council member in King County, which is the Seattle area, and the primary sponsor of a ban on facial recognition technology. Jeanne, welcome to the program. Tell us about this.
Well, thank you, Tom. I'm pleased to be here, and I'm a King County council member. We have 2.3 million residents in our very large county, and I've become increasingly concerned about the use of facial recognition technology for a lot of reasons. For one, its high level of inaccuracies in its application, its racial and demographic biases, and encroachment on all of us in terms of our civil liberties.
Now, you are, kind of at the epicenter of the, between you and Silicon Valley, I guess, between the King County and Silicon Valley, of much of the technology revolution that has brought us facial recognition. How's this going over with the big tech companies?
Well, the big tech companies have been pretty quiet about this. The only opposition to this legislation after 3 meetings before we took up action yesterday at our council was a representative from a security association. We did hear behind the scenes from a representative from one of the large big corporations in the area that was not pleased about the legislation but did not publicly oppose it.
Yeah. I recall when they started using cameras to read license plates years ago, there was a general, wasn't so much a general opposition, it was mostly actually right-wingers who were all flipped out about it. But this is not anywhere near as precise facial recognition as license plate reading. I mean, there's all kinds of kind of gray areas of, privacy and government surveillance and, knowing where you are at all times. And yet at the same time, you've got this cell phone where Google always knows where you are, So where do these boundaries begin and end in your mind, Jeanne, or Council Member Kohl-Welles? Yeah, well, thank you, Jeanne. For example, I mean, if facial recognition was to be tweaked and fine-tuned to the point where it was actually fairly accurate, or accurate enough to satisfy you, under what circumstances would it be okay to use it?
Well, it even could be more harmful if it gets more improved, because it would be likely used even more. And I'm very concerned about the surveillance of our people, especially when they do not know they're being surveilled. They may be in a crowd, and their facial expressions and measurements between their eyes and all of this are used and then later applied when there are searches going on. And we know for sure that people of color, BIPOC people, especially dark-skinned individuals, have a much higher inaccuracy rate with their readings. And so marginalized people, marginalized communities historically have been more surveilled and more jeopardized by taking away their civil liberties and privacy than others. And I just believe that that's much more likely to occur when the technology is improved.
Right. So, I see this as kind of existing on a I don't know if spectrum is the right word, but in a line. On one end of the line is China, right, which is using facial recognition technology to crack down on protesters and enforce an absolute police state, and aggressively using that, particularly in Hong Kong right now. And thus, the umbrella movement and the masks kind of helped with the advent of COVID, but the whole thing of the umbrellas was to block the cameras from being able to see the faces of the demonstrators. On the other end of the spectrum is, people living in a neighborhood, and pretty much everybody's got, a camera or a doorbell, that's keeping track of what's going on outside. And somebody comes into the neighborhood and commits some terrible crime. You kind of want to know who that was. how do we, which I guess is another way of asking this question, what standards do we have, or what standards do we lack to be able to say, this is intrusive state, this is leading to tyranny state, versus this is reasonable, crime, dealing with crime?
Well, that's a very good point. And I would like to emphasize, first of all, though, that this ban that is now imposed in King County is only on our government, agencies in our government. The one you think most likely of is the sheriff's office. But it is not imposed on private citizens. It is not imposed on the private sector at all. It is not imposed on any other governments within the boundaries of King County. So it is limited. I happen to think that government use of such type of surveillance and data that are collected, and we don't know where they go to or how they may be used later, is something that I find most troublesome. I'd rather it not be used at all.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And the reason I use the doorbell example is that Amazon, with their Ring doorbell, has been cutting deals with police departments all over the country. They, in the terms of service, apparently, if you have one of their doorbells with a camera in it, you get wired into your entire neighborhood can get wired into the local police department. And they can just kind of monitor everything that's happening outside your house all the time. And then that police department presumably could apply facial recognition technology to the feed that they're getting from your home. I mean, where do we start and stop? How do we, it's like, to me, it seems like we're trying to grab something that's just really squishy. And maybe it's just, a desire, I think a normal human desire to know exactly where the boundaries are. But what do we do with that?
Well, that's the problem. It's elusive, it's squishy, and I for sure would like to know if my facial recognition is being collected and stored somewhere, maybe sold somewhere. Where did the data go? And that is really creepy to me. Now, in fact, you mentioned standards, and there was a December 2019 study from the National Institute of Standards and Technology on facial recognition technology software found that false positives, keep this in mind, false positives are up to 100 times more likely for Asian and Black faces when compared to white.
Absolutely. And this is largely apparently because the technology was developed by white software engineers, and they used pictures of white people when they were developing it. But I think that over time that's going to get cleaned up. But then we're still stuck with this problem of, where does the surveillance state begin, and how do we stop that? We just have 30 seconds, Jeanne.
That's what my legislation is about. And I believe that privacy and social justice and civil liberties for our citizens, our residents, are more important than a global corporation's bottom line.
Yeah, I'm with you. Or than our fear of crime, frankly. I mean, at some point we're going to have to say, there are always trade-offs of these kinds, Jeanne Kohl-Welles is with King County Council member and primary sponsor of this ban on facial recognition technology. Jeanne, thanks so much for dropping by. Great talking with you.
Thank you very much.
And keep up the great work.